At that time, I was standing in the living room, staring out the window into the quiet neighborhood. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a dappled pattern on the floor. My thoughts were interrupted by the harsh, shrill tone of Ryan's voice, his words echoing through the house. Finally, it seems like luck is starting to come my way, huh? Now that the old man is dead, it's finally my turn. I turned around to face him, my heart sinking as I realized the depth of his callousness. It was shocking, disrespectful, and painful to hear him speak so soon after his father's passing, especially considering that his father had been nothing but supportive of us since our marriage. "Do you even understand what you're saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, a mixture of disbelief and sorrow thickening my words. "Of course, I understand," Ryan replied with a smug grin, seemingly unfazed. "I'll be taking the land and the fortune you inherited. Quite a lot, didn't you? You've been waiting for this all along, of course." I couldn't wait for him to pass on. He completely misunderstood everything. I could never feel that way about his father or anyone. "What? No matter how much you bluff, it's useless here," he snapped suddenly, and something whizzed past me to thud softly against the couch. I turned to see what he had thrown. It was a divorce paper, already signed. A chill ran down my spine as the reality of his intentions sank in. "A divorce paper? You can't do anything without me, so I'll make good use of your fortune." "What if I refuse?" I asked, trying to grasp the crumbling edges of our life together. "Are you stupid? What other option is there besides divorce?" Ryan retorted, his face contorted with scorn. For me, it was an opportunity. Everything up to now had been an illusion, and he didn't know my true self. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice rising as I began to gather my things. "What does it look like?" "I'm leaving this house." "You'll regret it," he threatened. "That's my line," I replied sharply, my voice steadier than I felt. "Wait, you are helpless if you leave." "We'll see about that. After all, your company has deals with my company, doesn't it?" "My company? What are you talking about?" he blustered, but I didn't stop to explain. "You'll find out soon enough. Oh, and don't worry about the divorce paper. I'll take care of it myself." And so, I left the house, immediately filed for divorce, and then I called his company. "It's me. The project is cancelled, and all contracts up to now are terminated. Please wait, if you do that, dash." My voice cut him off, firm and resolute, my true self as the head of a company with 7,000 employees. Now that it came to this, I'll go all the way. I wondered what he would do next. I also had a trump card. I am Stacy Morgan, who just turned 40 not long ago. I've gotten this old, haven't I? As I was lost in thoughts at home, I heard someone calling me. It was Ryan. "What are you doing sitting around here?" he asked. "Nothing much. If you're bored, you can at least clean the house." "Know your place," I sighed softly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't like this when we first met. I met Ryan just a year before, last year. At that time, I had no particular interest in marriage, it was as if I was married to my job. Yet, I ended up marrying Ryan. It all started with my father. I'm fine, no matter how many times you try. I have no intention of marrying now." "Now, don't say that. You're almost 40, aren't you? Being single at that age is dash." "Don't worry, father." I agreed reluctantly, my voice tight with frustration. "Okay, I'll meet him. But that's it. You stop smoking and drinking." My father's eyes twinkled with a mix of mischief and satisfaction, knowing he had cornered me into a concession. He nodded, "Deal. And you'll see, he's a good man. You'll like him." The next day, my father presented the man's photograph. It was of Ryan, captured in a candid moment, seemingly mid-laughter, his eyes bright and face open and friendly. Despite myself, I felt a flicker of curiosity. He did seem pleasant, at least in the photo. The arranged meeting was set for the following weekend at a small, cozy restaurant downtown. I walked in with low expectations, guarding myself against any undue optimism. Ryan stood as I approached, his demeanor polite, his smile easy. "Stacy, it's a pleasure to meet you," he greeted, extending his hand. His voice was warm, his handshake firm but gentle. The conversation that evening flowed surprisingly well. Ryan was articulate and genuinely interested in my career and ambitions. He listened intently, laughed at the right moments, and shared stories of his own experiences that mirrored some of my own aspirations. Despite my initial resistance, I found myself enjoying the evening more than I had anticipated. By the end of the dinner, Ryan had managed to pique my interest. He was different from what I had expected, more thoughtful and less imposing. As we parted ways, he said, "I hope this isn't the last time we meet. I would really like to see you again, Stacy." I drove home in a whirl of thoughts. My father's persistence suddenly didn't seem so misguided. Ryan had left a good impression, and I found myself considering a second meeting. The next day, I mentioned to my father that the dinner hadn't been as dreadful as I had feared. "I told you, he's a good man," my father said with a knowing smile. "Give it a chance, Stacy. Sometimes, we don't see the best things coming." And so, against all my prior reservations, I found myself gradually drawn into a series of dates with Ryan. Each meeting revealed more layers to his personality, his kindness, his humor, his intelligence. It wasn't long before our casual meetings turned into a serious relationship. As months turned into a year, my resistance faded entirely, replaced by a deep fondness and respect for Ryan. When he proposed, it didn't come as the shock it might have a year earlier. I said yes, feeling secure and excited about our future together. Yet, here I am now, reflecting on those beginnings in the shadow of our current turmoil. It seemed so simple back then, so promising. How had everything unraveled so quickly? How had the man I married, the one who had once seemed so right, turned into a stranger with such cold intentions? These thoughts weighed heavily on me as I stared out the window of my new, empty apartment. The freedom I had gained felt bittersweet, tinged with the loss of what I had once believed my marriage would be. As I stood outside the guest room, hand raised to knock, I paused, hearing Ryan's voice from within. He was speaking in low, hushed tones that suggested a serious conversation. Curiosity piqued, I leaned closer, trying to catch more of the conversation. "I understand things are going smoothly here." "Yes, don't worry," Ryan murmured through the door. There was a pause, then a muffled response, presumably from his phone. My curiosity turned to concern. Who was he talking to so early in the morning, and about what? Deciding to respect his privacy for the moment, I gently knocked. "Ryan, it's morning. Time to wake up," I called softly. The conversation inside ceased abruptly, and after a moment, Ryan opened the door, his expression a mix of surprise and mild embarrassment. "Good morning, Stacy. Sorry, was just wrapping up a call." "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but curious about the secretive nature of his call. "Yeah, all good. Just business stuff, you know how it is," he replied with a quick, somewhat forced smile. His response didn't quite ease the knot of doubt that had formed in my stomach, but I decided to let it go for the time being. We headed downstairs where my father was already sipping his morning coffee, looking remarkably cheerful. "Good morning. I hope the guest room was comfortable," he said to Ryan, who nodded appreciatively. "Yes, thank you, it was perfect," Ryan answered, settling down at the breakfast table. My father's eyes twinkled with satisfaction as he watched us, clearly pleased with how things were unfolding. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily, mostly driven by my father's anecdotes and Ryan's enthusiastic responses. Ryan was indeed captivating when he spoke, his charisma evident and his ambition clear in his every word and gesture. He talked about his plans for the future, his dreams of wealth and success, which seemed to align so well with what my father admired. After breakfast, Ryan excused himself to make another call, leaving my father and me alone. "So, what do you think of him?" My father repeated his question from the night before, his gaze keen and expectant. He's certainly ambitious and charismatic, I conceded, thinking about the morning's interaction and the snippets of conversation I had overheard. He reminds me a bit of you, actually. Ambitious, charming. My father laughed heartily. That's why I like him. He has that spark, that drive to succeed. It's important, Stacy. That kind of drive is what makes things happen. I nodded, though part of me remained uneasy. Ryan's ambitions were clear, but so was a certain ruthlessness in his tone when he thought no one was listening. His talk of becoming a president by any means necessary echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of his past dealings and his moral compass. For the rest of the day, Ryan's presence was felt throughout the house, his laughter ringing out, his footsteps echoing in the halls. As I watched him interact with my father, both of them full of plans and laughter, I felt a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He was indeed like my father in many ways, charming, driven, but perhaps also a bit reckless in his ambitions. As I pondered this, I realized that understanding Ryan fully would require more than just observing his charming facade. It would require seeing the man behind the ambition and the charm, a task I was now more intrigued and determined to undertake. After he hung up, Ryan seemed agitated, rubbing the back of his neck as he paced back and forth across the living room. That was my manager, he said finally, his voice strained. There are some big changes happening at work. Changes? Like what? I asked, concerned but also curious about the sudden shift in his demeanor. They're promoting me to a higher position, but it comes with a catch. I need to relocate. We need to move to another city, he revealed, his eyes searching mine for a reaction. The news took me by surprise. A new city meant leaving everything familiar behind, my job, my friends, and the life we had started to build together in our little apartment. That's a big step, I stammered, unsure of how to process the information. Ryan sat down next to me, taking my hands in his. I know it's a lot to ask, but I think this could be a great opportunity for us, for our future. It's a chance to start fresh, to leave all the misunderstandings and the tension behind. I nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. The thought of a fresh start was appealing, especially given the ups and downs we had experienced over the last few months. Yet, there was also fear. Moving to a new place could either mend our strained relationship or strain it further. Let's think about it together, I suggested, squeezing his hands. We'll weigh the pros and cons, and decide what's best for us as a couple. Ryan smiled, relieved. Thank you, Stacy. I just want us to be happy, and I think this could really help. As the days turned into weeks, we discussed every aspect of the potential move. We talked about where we would live, what I would do about my job, and how we would manage the transition. It was during these discussions that I saw glimpses of the Ryan I had fallen in love with, the considerate, thoughtful man who had first charmed me at that dinner hosted by my father. However, beneath the surface of these planning sessions, I could feel the weight of his earlier doubts and the harsh words he had once thrown at me. They lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the fragile state of our relationship. Then, one rainy evening as we were finalizing our decision about the move, Ryan turned to me with a serious look in his eyes. Stacy, I know I've made mistakes. I've said things I shouldn't have, and I've doubted you when I had no right. I want to make this work. Truly. His words were earnest, filled with a vulnerability that I hadn't seen in him before. It made me realize how much I wanted to believe in us again. Let's do this together, I said, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. Let's make this a new beginning. And so, we decided to take the leap, to start anew in a new city, hoping that it would bring us closer, mend the fractures, and allow us to rediscover the love that had first brought us together. As I packed up our belongings, wrapping each item carefully, I felt a mixture of nerves and hope. It was a risk, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was one worth taking. The tension in our home had grown palpable, and Ryan's nightly secretive phone calls did nothing to ease my worries. I felt disconnected from him, almost as if we were living separate lives under the same roof. One evening, as Ryan was again locked away in his study, murmuring into his phone, I stood quietly outside the door. I strained to hear, catching fragments of his conversation that seemed to revolve around some sort of deal or arrangement. "Everything's on track, just a bit more time," he said in a hushed tone. The mystery deepened, making me wonder about the nature of these discussions. Were they business-related, or was there something more personal at play? After several nights of gathering bits and pieces of his conversations, I realized I needed more concrete evidence. I decided to confront him directly, hoping he would be honest with me. One morning, after he had finished one of his calls, I walked into his study. "Ryan, we need to talk," I started, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. He looked up, surprised by my sudden assertiveness. "What's it about?" he asked, his voice guarded. "It's about these late-night calls. I can't help but feel like you're keeping something from me. It's affecting our relationship, and I feel like we're drifting apart. Can you please be honest with me? What's going on?" I pleaded, hoping for some semblance of openness. Ryan sighed deeply, running his hands through his hair. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I didn't want to worry you with this, but I've been working on securing a big project at work. It's a huge opportunity for us for our future. But it requires a lot of my time and discretion. I'm sorry I've kept you in the dark." While part of me wanted to believe him, another part remained skeptical due to the strain and secrecy that had built up over time. "I understand work is important, but so are we," I said firmly. "Can we at least try to be more open with each other? I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't want that." Ryan nodded, seeming to understand the gravity of my words. "You're right. I'll do better. I promise." From that day forward, Ryan made an effort to be more transparent about his work and his calls. He even started to include me in discussions about his projects when possible, which helped rebuild some of the trust that had eroded. However, the shadow of his previous secrecy lingered, making me wonder if I would ever fully know the extent of what was hidden. Meanwhile, my father's recovery was progressing well, despite the occasional setbacks. His spirit remained strong, and his determination to heal and adjust to his new limitations inspired me every day. I visited him regularly, cherishing the moments we spent together and the stories he shared, reminders of the resilient man he had always been. During one of these visits, my father took my hand, his gaze earnest. "Stacy, you've always been my strength. Don't let the challenges of life wear you down. Remember, no matter what, I'm here for you, and I believe in you." His words warmed my heart, offering comfort amidst the ongoing uncertainties in my life with Ryan. As I left the hospital that day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination to face whatever the future might bring, armed with the love and support of my father and the slowly mending bond with my husband. I nodded reluctantly and left the house alone. The drive to the hospital was a quiet one, my thoughts swirling with confusion and concern over Ryan's recent behavior and the strange silence that had enveloped our home. I couldn't shake the memory of the cluttered desk, the hidden photos, and the cryptic message scrawled in red. What was Ryan involved in that required such secrecy? Arriving at the hospital, I tried to push these thoughts aside. My father's health was improving, and that should have been my focus. As I walked into his room, his face lit up with joy, a stark contrast to the tension I had left behind at home. "Stacy, it's so good to see you," he greeted warmly, his voice still slightly weak but filled with genuine happiness. I embraced him, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" I asked, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Better, much better. But tell me, how are things with you and Ryan?" "You look a bit worn out, dear," he observed, his sharp eyes missing nothing. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's been a bit hectic with Ryan's work." "He's very busy," I replied, choosing my words carefully. My father nodded, though his eyes showed he suspected there was more I wasn't saying. "Work is important, but so is family, Stacy. Don't forget that," he advised, his tone gentle yet firm. As we chatted, I felt the weight of my worries lighten slightly, bolstered by my father's enduring strength and wisdom. He talked about his own recovery, his plans for when he would eventually leave the hospital, and his hopes for the future. It was a balm to my troubled spirit. After a couple of hours, I knew I had to face the situation at home. I hugged my father goodbye, promising to visit again soon. As I drove back, I resolved to confront Ryan. Whatever he was hiding, we needed to address it, for the sake of our marriage and my peace of mind. Upon returning, I found the house unsettlingly quiet. Ryan was in his study again, the door now firmly locked. My heart sank as I stood outside, feeling more like an intruder than a wife in what was supposed to be our shared home. I knocked softly, then louder when he didn't answer. Finally, the lock clicked, and he opened the door just a crack. "What is it?" he asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "We need to talk, Ryan. About everything. This secrecy can't continue," I said, my voice firm despite the shaking I felt inside. Ryan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Not now, Stacy. I can't deal with this now." "When, Ryan? When will it be a good time?" "Because we are losing each other, and I can't stand by and watch our marriage crumble," I pushed, my own desperation to resolve our issues spilling over. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I had married. "Okay," he relented tiredly. "Let's talk. But not here. Let's go out to the garden. I need some fresh air." As we sat on the garden bench, the evening air cool and slightly damp, Ryan finally began to open up about the pressures at work, his fears about failing, and how it had started to affect his behavior at home. It was the beginning of a long, hard conversation. But it was a start. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Ryan looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Extra work? That sounds tough. But you're handling it well, I hope?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes, it's challenging, but I'm managing. Learning a lot, too." That evening, as Ryan and I sat down for dinner, the conversation shifted towards general topics: our plans for the weekend, a new restaurant opening in town, and the mundane day-to-day. Yet, the undercurrent of my new secret responsibility weighed heavily on me. I was constantly balancing the act of appearing normal while also absorbing the vast amount of information and responsibilities that came with preparing to take over my father's role. Over the next few weeks, I spent every possible moment at the company, learning the ropes, understanding the operations, and meeting with different department heads who were surprisingly supportive. They were all aware of my father's decision and respected his choice, providing me with insights and guidance. This support was comforting, yet also added pressure to prove that I was capable of this huge responsibility. At home, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but Ryan started to notice small changes. My phone would ring more frequently during our evenings together, and I often had to step away to take calls. "What was that about?" His voice laced with a hint of irritation after I had returned from a particularly long call. "Just sorting out some issues with a project," I lied smoothly, although I hated keeping things from him. The secrecy was necessary, at least until everything was officially announced and settled. "You know how it is." Ryan frowned slightly but then nodded, accepting my explanation. "You've been really impressive lately, juggling so much. Just don't overwork yourself, okay?" I smiled, appreciating his concern. "I won't." "Thanks, Ryan." As the day of the official announcement drew nearer, my nerves became more frayed. I knew that stepping into the role of president would change everything, not just at work, but also at home. How would Ryan react when he found out? Would he support my new role, or would it create a rift between us? Finally, the day arrived. The board meeting where my father was set to officially introduce me as his successor was both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. As I sat beside him in the conference room, filled with the company's top executives and stakeholders, my father's pride in me was evident. He introduced me with glowing terms, speaking of his confidence in my abilities and his decision to choose me as the next leader of the company. The reaction in the room was a mixture of surprise and applause. Many were shocked but supportive, while a few seemed unsure, their faces unreadable. I accepted the role officially, promising to do my best to uphold the values and vision my father had set for the company. After the meeting, as I prepared to go home and tell Ryan everything, I felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. How would he take this news? Would he see this as a betrayal of our personal life, or would he understand the necessity of keeping it a secret until now? As I walked through our front door that evening, I knew it was time to find out. Ryan greeted me with a smile, unaware of how the conversation we were about to have could potentially change our lives forever. My father's death was a significant shock, and his final words about Ryan haunted me. What did he mean? What was in the envelope he mentioned? These thoughts churned through my mind as I dealt with the immediate aftermath of his passing. The next day, after handling necessary arrangements and still reeling from the events, I knew I had to find the envelope my father referred to. With a heavy heart, I went to my father's study, a place filled with memories of him, each one sharp and poignant now. His desk was as he always kept it, meticulously organized despite the numerous documents and personal items it held. I opened the drawer slowly, almost fearing what I might discover. There, tucked beneath some files, was the envelope, sealed and marked with my name in my father's clear handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside, there were several sheets of paper, including a letter from my father and several legal documents. The letter was written in his typical concise style, each word heavy with meaning. Stacy, it began, if you are reading this, then I am no longer able to protect you and the company. I've always known Ryan had ambitions, but recent discoveries have led me to believe they extend far beyond what I initially perceived. Below are documents and evidence that Ryan has been manipulating company resources and plans to take over, not just the company, but more than we ever imagined. Protect yourself and the legacy of our family. I trust you, my capable daughter. The legal documents detailed various transactions and communications that Ryan had hidden from the company's board and me, showcasing a clear trail of deceit and manipulation. My heart raced as I absorbed the depth of the betrayal. My father's warning now made chilling sense, and the trust one once had in Ryan crumbled completely. I needed to act, but how? Confront Ryan? Go straight to the company's board? Involve legal counsel? Each option spiraled into complex potential consequences. First, I needed advice from someone impartial and trustworthy. I called an old family friend who was also a seasoned lawyer, explaining the situation without revealing all the details over the phone. I need to meet with you urgently, I told him. It's about something my father discovered. Come over first thing tomorrow, he responded, his tone serious but reassuring. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with scenarios of confrontation with Ryan and the potential fallout. By morning, I was determined but exhausted, driven by the need to protect my father's legacy and the company he cherished. Ryan noticed my unrest at breakfast. You look like you didn't sleep. Worried about the company, he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp, assessing. Just a lot on my mind, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I'll be out for most of the day. Important meetings. Anything I should be aware of? He asked, a hint of suspicion in his tone. Just routine checks. I'll fill you in later, I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. As I left for the lawyer's office, my resolve hardened. Whatever it took, I was going to stop Ryan and safeguard what my father and I had worked so hard to build. The game was on, and I was more than ready to play. I went to my parents' house with a heavy heart, knowing that I needed to prepare for my father's funeral. It was a difficult time, but necessary. When I arrived, my mother expressed concern about troubling me while I was busy, but I reassured her that this was the priority. As we divided the funeral preparations, my mother mentioned something my father had said about checking his study. It jogged my memory, and I realized I had almost forgotten about it. I made my way to his study, located at the end of the first floor. It had been a while since I had been in there. Inside, I found the envelope he had mentioned and immediately went through its contents. What I discovered inside made everything that had been happening clearer. It seemed my father had been gathering something for my sake. On the back of the envelope, there was a handwritten message from him. Reading it made me realize that I no longer needed to hold back my anger and hatred toward Ryan, and I vowed to keep those feelings hidden until the right moment came. The funeral proceeded smoothly, and I felt we gave my father a proper send-off. However, I knew it wasn't over yet. Later, my mother called, and we decided to gather at my parents' house, just the three of us, my mother, Ryan, and me. We decided to open my father's will, which he had apparently prepared during his hospital stay. The contents revealed that the family home and half of the estate were left to my mother, while the rest, including the land, was left to me. It was a lot to inherit, and I wasn't sure what to do with it all. As the will reading concluded without issue, my mother suggested we go out to eat, but Ryan abruptly announced he was leaving. I couldn't help but notice the smirk on his face. It was then that I began to realize his true nature. After saying my apologies to my mother, I left the house, immediately following Ryan. I had a feeling he might be up to no good. When I arrived home, I found him lounging on the sofa, as if he owned the place. He asked what took me so long, insinuating that I was dawdling. I told him I came straight home. Then, with a smirk, he began to talk about how luck seemed to be turning his way now that my father was gone. It was clear that he didn't understand the gravity of his words, and it chilled me to the bone. I understood his intentions all too well. Ryan had been waiting for this moment, anticipating inheriting the land and fortune, eager to take it all for himself. His words cut through me like a knife, revealing his true colors. But even as he demanded I hand over everything, including the divorce papers he had already prepared, I couldn't bring myself to comply. Despite his threats and insults, I refused to give in. He tossed the divorce papers at me, demanding I sign them, but I couldn't accept such manipulation. It was clear he had no respect for me, seeing me as nothing more than a means to an end. As he declared his intentions to leave, believing himself to be the skilled one who would make use of my fortune, I realized that this was my chance to break free from his toxic grasp. I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated any longer. When he threatened divorce, I saw it as an opportunity rather than a threat. It was the chance I had been waiting for, to escape from his control and reclaim my life. So, without hesitation, I left the house, knowing that it was the right decision for my own well-being. Heading straight to the main street, I called for a limousine to take me to the city hall. There, I wasted no time in submitting the divorce papers, eager to sever all ties with Ryan once and for all. I wanted nothing to do with him or his deceitful ways. With the papers filed, I made my way to a certain place, driven by a sense of determination and resolve. It was time to take action, to reclaim what was rightfully mine and seek justice for the pain he had caused me. Entering the president's office, I knew what needed to be done. Despite the suddenness of the meeting, I explained the situation to President Hansen, knowing that he would understand. It was time to put an end to Ryan's schemes and ensure that justice was served. As I waited for Ryan to arrive, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had a plan in motion, and I wouldn't rest until I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. With determination in my heart and a sense of justice on my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Ryan stood frozen before me, the weight of his actions crashing down on him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It was time for the truth to come to light, for justice to be served. I greeted him with a calm demeanor, hiding the torrent of emotions. After all, I had spent years hiding my true feelings, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. Ryan's confusion was evident as I revealed myself as the president of the company. It had been a secret I had kept from even President Hansen, knowing that it would be too troublesome if he knew. Handing over the envelope my father had left me, I watched as Ryan's face paled with realization. Everything my father had researched and documented about Ryan's illegal activities was contained within those papers. It was clear that Ryan had done something unforgivable, using bribes and illegal methods to secure contracts. But as he tried to claim his right to inherit, I couldn't help but correct him. He had no right to anything that I had inherited. There was supposed to be a division of assets, but he had no claim to what was rightfully mine. Ryan's whole premise had been built on a lie. His father's supposed suicide due to a cancelled deal with a company similar to ours was nothing more than a fabrication. And as President Hansen confirmed, there was no record of any such deal in our company's past. Realizing the extent of his mistakes, Ryan was led out of the president's office, his fate sealed by his own actions. It was a bittersweet moment for me, knowing that justice had been served, but also mourning the loss of the man I had once loved. In the aftermath, President Hansen informed me that Ryan had been fired and was facing legal action for embezzling company funds. It was a fair response to his deceit and betrayal. But even as Ryan reached out to me, seeking forgiveness and understanding, I knew that our relationship was beyond repair. His apologies were too little, too late. I couldn't support him any longer, not after everything he had done. Deleting his contact information from my phone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of liberation. I was free from his toxic influence, ready to move forward without him by my side. Sitting in the president's office, I thought about the words my father had written to me. "Stacy, you are my pride and joy. Do as you wish. I believe in you." It was a reminder that I had the strength and determination to protect the company he had left behind. And so, with my father's words echoing in my mind, I vowed to protect the company with my life, ensuring that his